Hello and welcome back to the Chance Cube, where today we are going to be looking at something very exciting. We finally have the first few events for Legends of the Force, which means we can have a look at some deck lists, see what's doing well, maybe what's not doing as well as we expected it to, and to see whether or not there are any surprises in what decks are being taken to events. We've only seen 3 so far get logged on the tournament results website that we all like to use, but I will caveat before we get started that none of these events is bigger than 44 players. So of course there are going to be much bigger events to come. We've got Galactic Championships in a couple of weeks' time. I'm sure that's going to be really helpful. But I know there's people out there probably go into that, want to know, get a feel for how things are going in Legends of the Force so far. And so I thought we'd have a quick look, a quick breakdown at some of these lists and have a look at what is doing well. And interestingly enough, unsurprisingly, I should probably say, Han 2 is dominating the events we've seen so far. Like I said, caveat that with the fact there's only 3 of them and none of those events is bigger than 44. But if you are a Han 2 player and you're playing it with blue, then I would say we have seen some results that would suggest that that is the way to go for set 5, because across those 3 events, each one of them was won by Han 2 blue. And interestingly enough, not that much conversion rate for Han green into the top 8s that we've seen so far, which is really interesting because that deck has done very well in testing and it's been very, very good. I think what's actually happened is that it has struggled against the blue counterpart, and that's why a lot of people have taken the blue version. Now, I'll run briefly through the top cuts of the 3 events that we've seen so far, and then I'm going to go into some deck lists for some, but not all of them, because some of them are a bit too small for us to really read too much into. But the first one that we have here, Tournament City Games, that happened in America. It was in Maryland over the weekend just gone. 44 players, which actually is not a bad sample size to see what's doing well so far. It's kind of, mini PQ size in a way, so it's a good starting point, and it's all we really have right now, so we're definitely going to dive into it. And what I will say before we get into the fact that Han 2 has done very well and has dominated the top spots, it's not like we're staring at a top 8 across these events where everyone is a Han deck, like we had with Django, where everybody's playing Django Tarkin Town, or in set 2 where everybody's playing Boba but they're just pairing it with a different color. Thankfully we're not seeing that, which is encouraging, and the top 8s we're going to see are actually quite diverse, which is encouraging. Even if you're, a bit annoyed that, Han 2 is so good that it's able to win these events. So, Tournament City Games, the top 8 then. Top 4 cut was Han 2 Blue Force. The runner-up was a Gar Saxon Yellow, which got better this set. We'll have a look at why in just a second. There was a Palpatine Colossus that came 3rd, and then a Talzin Green that came 4th, which was very, very interesting. I watched some of this deck on stream over the weekend, and everybody sort of thought that, the red version of Talzin was going to be the much better way of playing Talzin, but clearly there's some play for the green one. And I had briefly looked at a way of making the green one work and just wasn't very happy with what I built, but unsurprising, because obviously I'm nowhere near as good as the type of people that can go to one of these events and make the top 4. So I'm going to be intrigued to take you guys through that list. And then some usual suspects for the rest of this top 8 then, which is also nice to see that, things are changing, but they're not changing so much that if you're sat there with a deck that's done well so far that you don't have to go out and buy loads of new cards. That's generally how I like to look at card games when the new set comes out, because we've got Cad Bane Tarkin Town, Darth Vader Yellow, Sabine ECL, and then an Anakin Blue, although this one was an Anakin Blue Force rather than the Anakin Blue. We saw it with Colossus or a 30 health base in the previous set. So this one probably is going to have a lot more Legends of the Force cards in it, but obviously the general core of the deck is still very similar to set 4, which is nice to see if you've been running that. We're going to have a look at the lists themselves after we've gone through the results. But one thing that was interesting about this particular event, I did watch some of this, was that apparently there was only 2 Sabine ECLs at the entire event, which in a 44-player event in Star Wars, I'm going to say is kind of unheard of, and probably a knock-on effect of just how good the Han decks have been, especially the blue one. It's very, very difficult for a ground aggro deck to get value against the Han decks right now. So it would appear that people who've been running Sabine in this particular area decided maybe it wasn't the right thing to bring along. So if you're scared of facing Sabine ECL, maybe right now is the time to run something. You don't have to worry about what that deck is like. But also nice to see that someone was still capable, I should say, of piloting that deck into the top 8 as well. So Good and bad news, depending on how you want to look at it. Then the other event that we saw was an online event, 33 players this time, and we only actually have the data for the top 4 for this one, so I can't actually tell you who finished in the top 8. But I did promise you that there was a lot of Han Blue in the top spots here, and that is exactly what happened with this online event, Take the Initiative Season 16, where Han Blue Force was the winner and the runner-up. So the final was just a mirror between these two, and there was some subtle differences between their lists, which we'll have a look at in a minute. Third place was a Krennic ECL, which was cool to see because we've been talking about with the addition of the new Darth Vader and a couple of other cards that actually a Krennic ECL or a Gar Saxon ECL, some kind of blue ECL deck was potentially going to do quite well this set, and Jarrell, who competed in this online event, has already shown that that is something that is possible. And then also, we were talking a couple of days ago, myself and Patrick, about Quinlan Tarkintown, about how that was also looking at a set with new cards that would help it to have some success, and Mini Captain was able to pilot Quinlan Tarkintown to 4th place in this one. I think, but I'm not 100% sure from what I've seen, that this Quinlan Tarkintown actually came 2nd in Swiss before then finishing 4th in the top cut. So a strong performance there from Quinlan Tarkintown, and it did have some new set 5 cards in it, which definitely make the deck better than it was in set 4, and it wasn't exactly bad even then. Then the final one we've got is a 21-player event, so I'm actually not going to look at the deck list for this one because, when we've got those other events that are slightly bigger, I think, it can be easy to read too much into the smaller events, but still worth pointing out that of the 3 events that we had over this weekend, it was once again another event where Han to Blue Force was the winner, but also the runner-up as well, like that other one. We saw Darth Vader Yellow come in 4th. We had a Han Green in 5th. Kylo Data Vault and then Kira Data Vault was 6th and 7th respectively. And then Cad Bane Tarkintown continues to still be relevant. That made 8th. The only one I've not mentioned so far, because I actually am going to look at the deck list for this one, was a Darth Maul Blue that came 3rd, which I'm not for any moment going to turn around and say, oh, all of a sudden this deck is going to be a meta contender, because it's a really interesting list. I am going to show it to you guys in a little bit because it's just fascinating. It's like a really interesting list. It's kind of like my pick for kind of jankiest in a good way deck of the week, and I think you guys might be interested to see exactly what's in it. But let's move on to some of the lists then for these events now, and we'll start with the winner of Tournament City Games, where it was of course Han to Blue Force. And mostly this deck list is not that surprising. We've got the Yaddles, we've got the Force Throws, Entrenched, Cassians. Ezra Bridger is really good as a 3-drop in Han because you basically get to have a 3/3 that if you've played Ogdo Bogdo the previous turn, he can now attack because he'll have the damage on him. And Ezra basically gives an experience to a creature unit or a Spectre unit. And from what I can see, the only Spectre unit in the entire list is Ezra himself. But there are a couple of creatures in Ogdo Bogdo and, of course, the Krayt Dragon. Now, you're probably not going to need to be putting experience tokens on your Krayt Dragon. But where I think those two really pop off, Ezra and Ogdo Bogdo, is really great at the beginning, where you can just keep making Ogdo Bogdo bigger and bigger, which is really cool. A load of other things in here that we would expect to see at this point. Chirrut, Kiadu Mundi is just an auto include at this point because he obviously fuels you being able to force throw your own stuff and guarantee killing things. We've got the Itinerant Warrior, which obviously heals when you play it. 3 Poe Damerons. Again, that card is just always great because it's overstatted. It has all the additional abilities as well. This one was actually running Bombing Run in the main deck, which I wonder if it was maybe an attempt to just get the edge over some other Han decks, because if you're dealing 3 damage to everything in an arena against a deck that has cheated things into play with damage on them, then sometimes that could basically count as a board wipe in a mirror. And of course, we're expecting Darth Vader Yellow to still be around, so main decking that is actually a really cool choice. 3 Anakins, 3 Mace Windus, 3 Luke Skywalkers, and 3 Krayt Dragons. It's the stuff that we expect to see at this point. And but the thing that we didn't expect to see was 1 copy of Force Lightning, which of course is being played out of Aspect, but its ability is so good that clearly they just thought they'd splash in with 1 copy of that. And evidently it was successful. Let's move on to the runner-up list then, which was a Gar Saxon Yellow. This was a list that was doing pretty well in the previous sets. It probably wasn't doing as well as people had hoped it would. It was basically it was a meta contender that if you took it, you were probably going to do quite well, but not loads of people were taking it because perhaps they weren't so comfortable with it. But it of course did get some incredible upgrades in Shen Flurry and Darth Vader, because the new Darth Vader, of course, is so good when it gets to attack on the turn it's played. Now, if you're putting that in a yellow deck, then what's the best way to make sure that it's going to have ambush when it comes out? Well, Shen Flurry is the way to do it. And with the Secretive Sage and Shin Hati as well, you've got additional things in this deck that have the Force keyword, which will basically help the Shin Flurry pop off more often than not. So, they haven't just put it in the deck for some kind of one-off combo. It's going to have impacts with those as well. And of course, a deck like this is traditionally quite aggressive. It just slams things down, hits base, and has that additional point of attack because of the upgrades. Quite often it's a shield, but sometimes it's an experience token or whatever. A lot of the time that's how it's winning games. But with the addition of Shin Flurry and then the Vader and things like that, it just helps it just scrap for the board that little bit more. If it needs to take things off the other side of the board so that it can give its more aggressive units something to do, or you give them the freedom to just keep attacking base, then that's going to be perfect. So honestly, this list terrifies me. And there's a guy who's playing it in my local store, and it's really hard to play against right now. And like I said, it just got even better in set 5 with the Vader. So yeah, I think Gar-Saxon Yellow is going to be getting played quite a lot. So this list is pretty good. I might run a version of it at some point just to test it out, because I think it is very cool. And someone was able to pilot it to top 2 in Tournament City Games. So well done to them. In third place is something that I'm very excited about. I have played Palpatine in the past. I've not played with the blue version as often as I'd like to, because when I was first playing Star Wars, basically, spoiler alert, I couldn't really afford all of the blue cards, which are very expensive. I do own them now, but I have historically played Palpatine Yellow whenever I felt that Palpatine is the deck worth bringing. And I might maybe do some gameplay on the channel with some Palpatine Yellow at some point. But Palpatine Blue has always been at the back of my mind, especially with Kira struggling slightly more with the Han decks than we thought she would once we did a bit of testing. Anyone playing green, blue, black was probably thinking about giving Palpatine a shot, and that is exactly what the person who came third in Tournament City Games did with this deck list. And I have to say, it is really interesting. Now, of course, you are always going to have the disadvantage with Colossus that you are going to start the game with one less card. The benefit of that is that you can kind of stall the game out a bit longer. You can just afford to with that extra point of health. But my understanding is whenever you play this deck, you want to play as many things in the deck that draw you cards. And interestingly enough, this person was able to pilot this deck all the way to the top 3 with only 2 copies of Dr. Pershing and not 3. So I find that really interesting. I reckon if I was playing this, I would almost certainly be playing 3 copies of him. But what I did like, and was a cool way of offsetting the hand disadvantage, and I saw it a couple of times on stream as well, was they played 1 copy of Tech, which is really cool because, of course, you're splashing that, so it's going to cost that little bit extra. But in a Palpatine deck where you're ramping quite aggressively with Super Laser Tech and Resupply, because you can kill your own Laser Tech and draw cards off it, getting to be able to play Tech, and then all of a sudden you don't have to worry about how many cards you have in your hand, because you now have, the resources is your hand as well. And also very helpful in a meta where there obviously is a lot of force throw. So that was a nice one-of in this deck that I think is a cool way around that. Now, I did mention about aggressive ramping. What was also fascinating about this list, which continues to fascinate me the more and more we all look at it, is the fact that it also ran 2 copies of Spark of Hope, which is also out of aspect because it's a heroism card, but it is effectively another efficient way of ramping, because it's going to cost you 4 in this deck, but you basically ramp by playing something from your discard pile that was defeated this phase into your resources. And considering that this deck basically lives and dies quite literally on killing its own stuff, you're always going to be in control of that. I've always liked Spark of Hope, but I've always felt like in a lot of heroism decks, sometimes you might sit there and it might brick your hand because things just aren't dying in the right order. You might claim and then they kill your guy, and then, oh, okay, well, I can't use Spark of Hope anymore because, it's got to be this phase. And then also, at the start of the next phase, maybe you don't want your guy to die, you want them to hit base. So, it's in this deck, it actually is kind of cool. And spending 4 on that or maybe, I suppose it might be 5 if you've spent one of those resources killing your guy. I just think it's a really cool choice, and I definitely want to test that in this deck. A couple of other things that it's also got, we already mentioned the value of Vader, and, we've said that it needs to have ambush for it to have an effect. So this guy went with 3 copies of Timely Intervention, but also went with 3 copies of Admiral Priet, the 2-drop 1/4 from set 1 that basically gives every unit you play that it costs 6 or more has ambush, just a staple to it because of Priet, which is very cool. I've struggled to make this card work in the past because a lot of the time you don't necessarily like the idea of playing it on 2, because by the time you get to your 6 resources turn, he's probably dead because your opponent has gone, well, I kind of don't want you being able to use that ability, and you might have more value later on when you maybe on the 8 resource turn because you spend 2 on the Piet, 6 on the Vader. But clearly worked for this guy, and so it's definitely worth testing. But one thing that's super interesting, I keep saying that about this, super interesting, is that there is no overwhelming barrage. I find that so fascinating to have a Palpatine list with no overwhelming barrage. It's with Colossus and only 2 Dr. Pershings. It's running 3 cards out of Aspect. No big Devastators and only 1 Avenger as well. It's removal. You've got 3 Mauls. We've got 3 Reinforcement Walkers for additional draw. It's got 3 Anakins. And separately, I have to say that Anakin is in a lot of decks. He's in blue heroism decks. He's in blue villainy decks. We all knew that was going to happen. So if you have some copies of him, I'd hold on to them. I wouldn't sell them because I think you might need them. And if you don't own any yet, I think buy them now because already we're seeing 3 ofs in a lot of high performing lists. So yeah, that's probably my takeaways from this Palpatine list. And let's finish off with that Talzin Green I mentioned. I promised that we'd have a look at this. And this is just an interesting list as well. I mean, it runs a lot of the things you'd expect. Because with Talzin, you do really have to pair her with Karis so that you can get that, -2/-2 when she dies. And then you'd also want to run it with Talzin's Assassin so that when that one's played, you get the -3/-3 by using the Force. Chirrut makes total sense, as does the new Vader, Fel the Dragon, Secretive Sage, all of these different ways of just that's what blue decks are doing right now. People had been pairing it with red because if you are constantly using the leader ability to -1/-1 something, being able to do mathematical damage to things with the red cards like Daring Raid or Open Fire, things that ping stuff, a lot of that is in red. It's really interesting to see which green cards they went with because clearly their view is that the green version is better. And it's also worth saying, of course, this came 4th. So it did well at the tournament. So let's focus on those. So Timely Intervention makes a lot of sense because Vader's in the deck. Overwhelming Barrage also makes sense in green villainy, of course. If you're looking to -1/-1 stuff, that is what green can do best for, mathematically damaging things. So you can bring them within the range of either a Talzin leader tap or a Karis tap or playing an assassin. Of course, you can't really play a green deck without some ramp, so I kind of like the idea of, having Resupply and Super Laser Tech. But interestingly enough, this deck actually only ran the Super Laser Tech. The idea of Talzin coming out early is just any leader coming out early is great. But a couple of other interesting things you might not necessarily have expected to see. We've got Maz Kanata. It's a good way of kind of aggroing the game because she's basically a fleet lieutenant for Force units. You play her, and if you have a Force unit, it's going to attack +2/+0. And then the Dagoyan Master, which people are just basically calling the Duck, is basically card draw because you're just using the Force when played, and I think it's on defeat as well. So look at the top 5 and take a Force unit. So that's kind of cool. You're making sure that your hand size is filled up. Maybe a good way of getting around Force Throw. So that's what the Talzin Green listed. It's weird because I look at the list and I still don't think it necessarily looks amazing, which is not to say it's bad. Clearly it's good. Maybe it was just a good player as well. But it's probably I think worth trying Talzin Green if you have been trying Talzin Red and maybe weren't enjoying it as much as you thought you would. Try it with the green, and you never know. You might stumble upon something like a top 4 at a 44 player event like this player did. Right, let's move on to our second event now and have a look at the top cut for that particular event. We're going to look at the top 4 again for this one. And as promised, it is more of the Han 2 blue Force decks. And interestingly enough, the one thing I didn't mention about the list that won the previous event, the bigger of the 2 events, was that they didn't run any Grogus. But what does unite the 2 lists that had a mirror in the final of this Take the Initiative event is that they both had Grogus. And we talked about the value of Grogu before. He can take the damage off something that you've damaged by playing it with Han and then move it across the board, and then effectively it becomes removal. And he's kind of the big difference here. I'm undecided about whether or not he's better or worse, either in or out of your deck, but clearly you don't have to run him. We're already seeing different schools of thought on Grogu, so it's interesting there if you've been umming and ahhing about him. No Force Lightning this time around, a bit of a shame. We do see Shatter Points in this one, which weren't in the other Han list. Shatter Point being quite a good piece of removal if you have the Force engine online. This one also ran Pillage. It also ran a Chewbacca as well, the Sentinel, and it ran the Rebellious Hammerhead, which, with the additional cards you're drawing of Ki-Adi-Mundi, is just going to be destroying more things. I do apologize. My camera is actually in the way of the final card in this list, and Crate Dragon fans, fear not, don't worry. This guy still had a Crate Dragon in his list. There's not that much to say else about this list other than just to reinforce to people that Han Blue Force is doing very well right now. Phantom 2 was an interesting tech card in there as well, but a lot of the usual suspects are there, like your Ogdo Bogdos, your Chirruts, your Lukes, your Cardi-Mundis, things like that. Then the deck that came second, this one had Yaddles, where the other one didn't. This one had Yodas. This one had Anakins. It also had Crate Dragons. My camera's in the way again. And it also had the set 1 Mace Windu as well, which I always just think is a great one-off because it's just sometimes just a fantastic piece of removal that can actually win you the game because it readies after it kills stuff. This one had Kanan as well, so an increased little bit of synergy with the Ezra because now this list has slightly more targets for the 3-drop Ezra's ability of basically giving experience tokens to a Spectre or a creature. Crate Dragons are here, as is Ogdo Bogdo. So actually, this list getting even more value off the Ezra Bridger. Although it's worth saying that this is, of the 3 lists we're going to look at today, the one that did not actually win an event. So make of that what you will. Now, we mentioned that there was Krennic at this particular tournament, and it's always nice to see a green, blue, black list doing well because I am an enthusiast of that particular color pairing. And a lot of people have been talking about doing Kira ECL or maybe Gar Saxon ECL. So far, from the limited results that we've seen, it is Krennic that has done best so far. You know, each damage unit is +1/+0. And there's obviously good ways of damaging your own units here. You know, there's the Royal Attaché that comes in with damage on it. Pershing damages itself. The Death Trooper damages friendly units and then damages an opponent, so you get a double value there. Which is cool. So there's good ways of interacting with that in the beginning, and then Lon Pike can then give those units shields so they can start 2-for-1ing things. So it's a cool list here. A lot of stuff that you'd expect to see. Power of the Dark Side and a lot of the blue removal. Glory. We've got both Vaders in this. I mean, that's what's exciting about running ECL is because you can go ECL 1 Darth Vader and then you just ambush the other 7-drop Darth Vader, and there's lots and lots of very cheap Dark Side units that can be triggered from the Vader deploy. Reinforcement Walker, Devastators, Supreme Leader Snoke, Overwhelming Barrage. A lot of this is what you'd expect to see, and just nice to see that it has done well. Now, what I think most excited about from this event is seeing Quinlan get a top 4 with some of the new cards, and mostly this shell is kind of the same as what we would have expected to see, and the new cards that are very much, new additions because they are set 5 cards are Adigalia, which I think we're going to see in a lot of Red Force decks. Good way of effectively speeding the game up because Quinlan really needs to finish games quickly, I think, especially with a lot of when there's control-ear decks around. Quinlan has to finish the game faster, and control-ear decks usually use events to sort of make that happen. So it's just a nice way of just speeding up the clock with that particular unit. So I think it fits perfectly into this list, and it doesn't actually rely on you having the Force, because it's worth saying that this list is still with Tarkin Town, and so at no point are you having to worry about generating the Force. With the new units that are there. We've got the new Quinlan Vos card, which basically has that buff when it has extra attack, which in a list with the Hotshot Blaster, and then of course the brand new Constructive Lightsaber. There's great ways of making sure that unit is going to get the value off that ability. And the Constructed Lightsaber I love in this deck because for the very first time, it is a way for Quinlan to have some restore. I've played a few Quinlan games in the past and basically thought to myself, if I had a 30 health base, I'll win this game. But because I have a 25 health base, I've basically just lost on one action in the final phase because, my opponent can just do that extra point of damage before I can get all my guys in. Because Quinlan decks are always going to go wide. But it's just, can you get your damage in fast enough? Are they going to disrupt you? And sometimes you just need to buy one action activation, and healing is huge with that. And so having that is great. It will have the restore ability when it's on a heroism unit, of which there are loads, but when it's on a monocolor unit, so not a heroism or a villainy one, it actually gives that unit Sentinel, which is another thing that Quinlan has not really had in the past, is a Sentinel that you are feeling like you want to run in the deck all the time, main deck it. We had that sort of like weird kind of ground thing from set 4 that was like a vehicle that was a 5/3, which it hits hard, but it only takes 3 to plink it off. So it hasn't always been easy for a Quinlan deck to run Sentinels that it's happy having in the deck. Whereas now with this particular lightsaber, you can put it on a heroism unit if you need to heal. You can put it on a non-heroism unit if you feel like you don't need to heal right now, you just need to slow them down. And the best thing is, of course, you're being able to choose the units that you want in the deck anyway with that ability. So I just think the more and more that I think about the Constructed Lightsaber in the Quinlan deck, I just think it's an auto-include for anyone playing Quinlan now. So yeah, nice to see that there. Now, I did promise Janky List of the Week, which on this particular occasion is Darth Maul Shadowed Undercity. It's Darth Maul, the new Darth Maul Blue. Now, this one came third in that 21-22 player event. So, you know, let's not go around saying this is, you know, the new bee's knees or anything like that. I mean, full credit to the guy that built this list. But I just love it. I just think it's great. What they've basically done is they've taken some of the blue cards that are good with Talzin and paired that with a leader that is pinging things for one. You know, you ping one for one and you ping another for one. And that means that a lot of those cards are getting some value. It's a good way of running Force Throws and Force Lightnings. You know, those are just great cards right now. It's always getting the Force basically with the Acolyte of the Beyond and loads of Force units. You can use the ping on your own Night Sister Warrior to draw you the cards if you need to. It's really leaning quite nicely into discard as well, which I think is really cool. I'm a discard player in Lorcana, so I always appreciate a good discard deck because it is not just running Pillage and Force Throw and Jedi in Hiding, it's also running No Bargain. Quite an old card, I haven't seen that in a while. That basically, opponent's going to discard something, you draw, so a nice net +2 effectively in terms of hand advantage. They lose when you gain one. Now you're probably all wondering why I haven't mentioned it yet, the elephant in the room, is that this list ran resupply as a splash. I find that so strange. Sometimes when you run something, you know, you splash something, it's usually something that's, you know, cost efficient. This resupply is costing 5 in this list, and somehow still able to gain some success. Now, I think the reason why that is because, you know, this list looks like it's quite good at stalling the game out. It's got cheap ways of doing Force Throw, Force Lightning, you know, because it's got cheap Force units, it can do that nice and early on. It's got good discard, which mean that aren't, you know, inefficient. You know, you've got them on the body of a Jedi in Hiding. You've got it in the Force Throw, which is just always an efficient way of doing it. You know, the Pillage probably finishes the job off. So that if you've got your opponent effectively top decking, so that they're basically a lot of the time drawing 2 for turn, having to resource 1, got 1 card left in hand, is it the end of the world if you spend 5 on a resupply, which just moves you faster to playing the top end of this deck, which is the Devastators, the Avengers, the Palpatines, and the Great Dragons? I think that's probably what they were trying to do here. I haven't tested this at all. I just saw this list and thought, you know what? I think people will want to hear about this because it's nuts. And it didn't, you know, completely bomb out. So very, very cool. Very, very cool indeed. Well, that just about brings us to the end of this very quick summary. I wanted to do this in a nice, quick and tight video just to show you guys some of the lists. The links for how you can access some of these lists and some of these tournament results will all be in the description, so go and check those out. Me and Patrick will be back very soon to break some of these lists down in more detail, talk about what we want to do with our decks for the next week, because whenever you see results, what tends to happen is people go, oh, that's cool. Here's how I'm going to counter it. So, you know, we've only scratched the surface today. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully a shorter form video is helpful for people. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button and the bell notification so you don't miss any content. And if you prefer to access this sort of thing as a podcast, then you can subscribe to us on Spotify as well so that you don't have to put up with this face. All you have to do is listen to mine and Patrick's voices. So don't forget to do that as well. Well, with that, may the force be with you and I shall see you next time.